who wrote the Torah, the simple answer is, although like all simplifications, it needs to be qualified and elaborated upon, but the standard Jewish answer, as Maimonides formulates it, is God dictated to Moses, to Moshe, word for word for word, and the actual writing was by Moshe, who was simply following the dictation of the Almighty. And indeed, the Rambam states, as one of his 13 principles of faith, that anyone that said that Moses or any other person added a single word or letter to the Torah that was not dictated directly from God is considered to be a heretic and is denying the divinity of the Torah. Now, that is the standard answer, and that is the general answer, but I do need to add a few qualifications. First of all, there is a discussion in the Gemara itself regarding the last 8 verses of the Torah. The last 8 verses of the Torah discusses Moses died, etc. Did Moshe write those words and Moshe died? So according to one opinion, the last 8 verses of the Torah were not written by Moshe at all. They were written by Joshua, they were written by Yehoshua, after Moshe's death. Now that does not change the divinity of the Torah, because God just dictated those last 8 verses to Yehoshua. That is one opinion. According to another opinion, Moshe Rabbeinu actually wrote those last 8 verses even before he died, and in the language of the Gemara, Moshe kosev bedema, Moshe wrote it in tears as he was crying in anticipation of his death. Bottom line is, though, that every word of the Torah was inscribed al pi Hashem, by direct divine revelation. It was not paraphrased. Moshe did not write it in his own words. Yoshua did not write it in his own words. God said exactly what is to be written. What's interesting, though, is that it's not only a question of who wrote the Torah, the question is, when was the Torah written? Because if you think about this, everyone knows the statement in Pirkei Avot that Moshe received the Torah at Sinai. Now the problem is, we were at Mount Sinai right in the middle of the Torah. This is chapter 20 of the book of Exodus. Now a lot of the history of the Torah that's recorded in the Torah occurred after we were at Mount Sinai, whether it's the sin of the golden calf, whether it's the sin of the spies, whether it's the Korach rebellion. Now, it's not plausible, it's frankly not logical, that the Jewish people received the Torah about all the events that didn't yet happen. Among other things, that would make the rest of the Torah a play act in which people are just reading their parts, and that would destroy the reality of free will. So obviously, when we say Moshe got the Torah at Sinai, Torah does not mean the 5 books of Moses. Torah means the commandments. God gave Moshe the commandments at Sinai, which he later communicated to the Jewish people. But the narratives of the Torah did not take place and were not written down until after they happened. So, the way Nachmanides explains it, at Sinai, God dictated to Moshe the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus up until the Sinaitic revelation. And then, as each event occurred, after the event, God told Moshe how to write it up. So the sin of the golden calf was not written in the Torah till after the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the spies was written up after the sin of the spies. The sin of Korach was written up after the sin of Korach, which means we did not have a complete Sefer Torah until the very day that Moshe died, 40 years after we left Mitzrayim. The Torah was written in a piecemeal way over a period of 40 years. It's important to make that point because sometimes people erroneously think that Moshe came down from Mount Sinai with the whole Torah. He did not. He came down from Mount Sinai with 2 tablets, both the first time and the second time, that contained the 10 Commandments. And after he came down, before he went up, he wrote the Torah from Bereshis until the events of Sinai. But the rest of the Torah was written over a period of 40 years, the remaining 38 years after the Sinaitic revelation. So what this actually means is, therefore, that when our sages use the word Torah, it is not always a consistent meaning. Sometimes it refers to the Bible, the 5 books of Moses. Sometimes it refers to the mitzvos of the Torah, but not to the 5 books of Moses. So you have to pay very, very careful attention to the context in which the word Torah is used.
Moment of Wisdom. Sub-brief and life-changing moments. Join us. Subscribe to Moment of Wisdom channels on YouTube, Telegram, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.